Without fail, every single month I'm getting asked, what am I planting? What am I planting in July? What am I planting in August? So we're doing a what we're planting in August video today. It's kind of a long list. Although the garden is thriving and producing, we're 90 days out from our first frost date roughly. So it's time to start thinking about fall. It's time to start thinking about winter. And we need to get some succession crops in the ground too. By far my favorite succession plant to be getting in the ground now in August is a root crop. It's a root crop that I think a lot of people have difficulty growing because they're actually trying too hard. And Meg talks about this a lot because she's kind of the queen of chaos sowing carrots, which has been a huge source of inspiration for me as I'm dealing with filling garden gaps in this summer as things are starting to get harvested and we've got these blank spaces that we need to fill. So that's why I'm planting succession rounds of carrots this August. And I have 3 different types that I'm going to be trying. Now, Meg has said that it's easier to grow carrots that are more conventional when you're doing this kind of chaos sowing method, which basically all that means is that instead of making nice neat rows of your carrots, we're opening these packets up, we're dumping them on the ground, and we're just letting whatever comes up, comes up. Now, carrots are really tiny seeds. They need to stay consistently damp while they're germinating. So the only caveat here is that we do need to be keeping on top of watering anytime we're seed starting carrots in the garden, making sure that we're surface watering those areas regularly so that they don't dry out while the seeds are germinating. I'm trying a few different varieties for the fall and winter that I haven't done before, and one that is a classic for me. So for the new varieties, I have Dragon. Dragon is just a classic purple carrot. This one is called Snowman, and I bet you can guess why. It's a white carrot, and it's a pretty big one too. I've never grown white carrots at all. I've grown other types of like galaxy purple carrots, but not Dragon. So I'm interested to see how Dragon does in comparison to what I've tried before, because I'm really trying to dial in on varieties that I think are going to continue to do well in my climate, in my soil, and especially with this kind of chaos sowing method where we're just sprinkling them in everywhere all throughout the season. But my go-to carrot, if you're having trouble growing carrots, is the Napoli carrot, and this is just your classic conventional orange carrot. One thing that's really great about the Napoli as opposed to the Dragon and the Snow, which take about 70-75 days to mature, is Napoli is ready in about 50-55 days. So if you're going to choose any type of carrot to grow as your first carrot, or if you've had trouble growing carrots in the past, I would suggest Napoli. Carrots do take like 6 to 21 days to germinate, so it's a long time to be babying your soil and surface watering, but they keep in the ground super well for fall and winter. And once they do sprout, you just want to thin them to be about 1 to 3 inches apart. The next seed that I'm sowing in August is a little bit tricky to get the timing right because it doesn't like to germinate in temps above 85. However, it needs about 70 days in order to mature. So in order to get this plant flowering and then ready to harvest before our first frost date in 90 days, we have to hit kind of a sweet spot. The difficulty that I've had in the past with snap peas is that they can take a really long time to germinate. Now the packets will tell you 5 to 10 days. I have had more experience where it's taken up to 2 weeks unless I actually soak the seeds. So soaking the seeds, I'm getting consistent germination within 5 to 7 days, which when we're dealing with a very short days to maturity and harvest window for the fall and winter, it's important that we are timing this correctly. So being able to control the germination speed a little bit by soaking those seeds for 24 hours before you plant them can make a huge difference. I'm planting these about 1 inch deep after soaking them for 24 hours. And after that, they do pretty much all of the work for me, and they help to fix nitrogen in the soil too. I'm trying to get as many of you guys into winter gardening with me as I possibly can. So that's why we're talking already about these plants that need to be started now for our winter months. If you're watching this and you're really just looking for stuff that you can get in the ground at the beginning of August and be able to harvest before winter sets in, it all comes down to paying really close attention to those days to maturity. And there's still a good number of plants that we can grow within the 3 months that we have left before we're seeing these freezing temps that will kill off a lot of the plants. So if you're looking for succession plants to sow right now to harvest before your first frost date, I have 3 more options for you before we dive back into planning for fall and winter crops. And these are all things that will mature within like the 50 to 70 day range. So you'll still have a good buffer of time to harvest them before your first frost actually sets in. So we've already talked about carrots, which will be ready before your first frost, but they're okay to continue going into the colder months. Another one that I'm always sticking in anytime I have a garden gap is beans, and I'm growing this Gold Rush variety this year. These have been pretty darn prolific. I've been really happy with the germination rate on these, with their productivity. They're really pest resistant. I haven't had any issues with pests on them, and you get a nice big crop. Plus it just adds a different color to the mix, because green beans are great, but I'd much prefer to have a purple green bean or a yellow green bean just to mix things up a little bit. They also hold their quality really, really well on the plant and off the plant. So even though you get this huge bumper crop at once, you don't need to use it up all at once, which is really nice to have in a low maintenance garden where you're not trying to do these huge big harvests and having to preserve it all at the same time. Another classic that you can start growing now and be harvesting in 45, 50 days is your summer squashes. So this is going to be your zucchinis, of which there are many different types, your patty pans, and your crookneck summer squash. I actually prefer to grow my squashes later in the year. So when you plant your squash in June, in May, there's a lot more opportunity for the squash vine borers to lay their eggs and for them to hatch and destroy the vines. And so you may end up with a plant that's just about to start producing, but the SVB comes in and destroys it before it really gets a chance to take off. So I actually tend to wait to plant my squashes until mid-July, mid-August. This is perfect timing to get a fall crop of these in. And with this plant, what we're dealing with a lot of the times is disease kind of has a big impact on the production of this fruit. So it's a really good idea to be planting these every 3 to 4 weeks so that you have a new crop coming in as soon as the old one starts getting hit really hard by bugs or disease. And that crop is cucumbers. I'm doing a few different kinds of cucumbers this year. I have lemon cucumbers, I have Marketmore cucumbers, and I also have these Suyo cucumbers. My cucumber vines have been hit so hard with blight and cucumber beetles, and they are still pumping things out, but as soon as they start to die off, I want to have a new batch already growing, already up the trellis, so that I can continue to harvest these cucumbers. And cucumbers also mature really fast. It's about 70 to 75 days on these. I have to admit that I'm probably a little bit late in planting these. However, I've decided to take a risk. Our first frost date on average is October 31st. I've been finding it's coming later and later and later, and so I'm taking a risk with this one because I completely forgot to put it in sooner, and it's actually one that somehow I've never even tried to grow before, which really makes no sense to me. There are types of cabbage that you can grow much later in the season, but the ones that I picked are supposed to be sown right now or a couple of weeks ago. This was just poor planning on my part, but I'm gonna go with it. We're gonna see what happens. I actually planted cabbages in my green stalks along with a ton of other brassicas that'll help me get through the winter. But I have two different types. I'm doing a Red Globe F1 type, which is a hybrid, and I also have this Calabos type. Both of these are in the red or magenta category, and I just did that because, again, it's the summer of purple. I'm trying to get more purple stuff in the garden. Green is kind of the default color. Anytime I have a purple option, I'm gonna pick it. I haven't grown either of these before. I haven't grown any cabbages before, so I really don't have any tips for these, but as with any of your brassicas, your kales, whatever you're growing for mustards, you're planting these about 1/4 of an inch deep, just below the soil of the surface, keeping them damp until they germinate, and crossing our fingers that the weather doesn't fluctuate too many different times to different extremes and cause them to bolt. I grow this plant every single year, and I've never had any issues. And this year, I haven't even been able to get it to germinate. And this is just the way that it goes in the garden sometimes. Like, the things that you think you've mastered, the garden's like, no way, you have not. So we're experimenting this fall because I haven't been able to get any kale to germinate. One of the things that I will do whenever I start having an issue with a plant that normally I have no issues with is I'll go back to the drawing board and I'll be like, okay, clearly we need to experiment with some different varieties and that might be part of the problem, and it could also have just been a bad batch. So we're starting fresh, we're starting over, new batches of seeds, new varieties we've never tried before. So it's kind of a blessing in disguise when things go wrong, because it gives me the excuse to try something new. All of these mature within the 50 to 60 day range. This is the Ebony lacinato, otherwise known as dinosaur kale, and this was what I was trying to grow all spring and summer, and none of it would germinate. If it did germinate, it was just immediately leggy, like it bolted before it even knew what bolting was. So we're trying a different brand of the dinosaur kale this time. Ebony is a more compact kale plant. It's about 22 inches tall, and it has those really deeply ribbed leaves, which supposedly makes it harder for cabbage whites to lay their eggs on it. I was gonna test that this spring, but I didn't have the chance because they never came up in the first place. And then we went with this version of winter boar called Prism. This is a really heavily frilled, short-stemmed kale, so it's really good for container cultivation, which, since we are starting a lot of seeds in the greenhouse to overwinter, that was a priority for me. Kale plants can get really, really big, and so compact varieties were at the top of my list. And then we're doing a purple red boar curly kale. This one's also on the smaller end. It ranges from 18 to 24 inches tall, and it's got really curly leaves. So I wanted something with a lot of texture, a lot of color, a lot of flavor, and I'm hoping that these three options give me that. This is also the time of year where I see every single store advertising for Halloween. And I don't know about you, but I need to live summer before I'm ready to think about fall. And it's fine if you want to grab your decorations now so you're ready, but the idea that we're already putting out those decorations is kind of ridiculous. However, the idea that we're planting those decorations is maybe a little bit more reasonable, because pumpkins need about 70 to 80 days, at least these smaller varieties, to fully mature. So now is the perfect time to get your pumpkins in the ground. And I'm doing one variety this year that I always do, and one variety that I've never done before. The variety I always do is just a sugar pie pumpkin. We like pumpkin pie, we like having pumpkin puree, it's really good for you. You can put it into baked goods, and sugar pie pumpkins are just the #1 pumpkin for doing that, and they're very easy to grow, very prolific plants. I also wanted to experiment and have a little bit of fun, because I think it would be really cool to decorate the greenhouse for fall if we have time. I decided to try these Casperita pumpkins. These are mini white Cinderella pumpkins. So this one will just look really good with like a collection of gourds and stuff, but it is also totally edible. Pumpkin seeds, I usually do 2 to 3 seeds in one hole. You can scarify them. I have never done that, and just kind of let them do their thing. Like, I let them grow wild. They take up so much space, but I love that because you can use them to kind of fill in gaps, act as a living mulch, cover areas where you know you have a lot of aggressive weeds, and that's what I'm doing with them this year. Towards the middle and end of August, there's a couple of more cold-loving crops that we need to get in the ground if we're gonna have them overwinter for us. And they also happen to be some of my favorite greens, so let's get into it. This is a great lettuce alternative. It's a bit of a mild mustard flavor, and it's super, super bolt resistant. It even germinates well in really cold temps and really wet weather. So it's a good one if you're just getting into brassicas, into mustards. I would recommend this as a starting point. It's also just really pretty. It's frilly and kind of like got this pretty bushy habitat that I just think looks so nice in a garden. And one thing that it's harder to get a lot of in the winter garden especially is color. So to add color back into our fall and winter garden, I'm doing a 5-color silver beet or Swiss chard. I honestly have trouble picking Swiss chard only because it is so pretty in the garden. It adds this beautiful kind of vibrant neon color to a space, and every time I pick it, I just get kind of sad that I've taken some of that out of the garden. And people always ask me how to cook with Swiss chard. I use it just like spinach. The stalks are edible, but they have a really earthy beet flavor because they're related to beets. So if you don't like that, you can just cut the stalks out and use the green part, saute it, throw it in quiche. And I should have said this earlier, but we're direct sowing all of these. These are not things that I'm starting inside. I do not like transplanting, especially at this point in the year. I am just kind of done. And so I'm picking stuff that I know I can just throw in the ground and it will do its thing. Swiss chard especially, I don't recommend transplanting. I've had a lot of issues with them having very tender root systems, and when you transplant them, it can stunt their growth. They're just kind of divas, so being able to direct sow them is your best bet. I was a little bit skeptical that this one could be started into August because it is a cool loving crop. In fact, I've only ever had success growing it when I plant it in extremely cold temperatures. So I'm not sure how this is going to work, but the seed packets say that it should. I'm going to be starting some giant winter spinach soon. True to the name, very cold hardy, very big leaves. If you like spinach, this is a good one to try because it will give you a prolific harvest in a small space. I will make sure to link seeds down below so that you can grab yours and get planting. But let me know what you're starting this month in the comments down below. Make sure you hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my other videos. Thank you so much for gardening with me, and happy growing.